My name is Riley Moore. I'm 36 years old. I used to be a JAG officer, military law. The kind of job where your signature matters more than your smile, where silence isn't weakness, it's record keeping. For 8 years, I served as legal counsel for the Department of Defense. I've prosecuted soldiers who wore too many medals and defended ones who weren't allowed to speak. But nothing in those courtrooms, no tribunal, no hostile cross-examination, prepared me for the moment I sat in a private law office in Virginia and heard my name not mentioned at all. The will was 31 pages. The executor read it like a recipe, measured, detached, clinical. He spoke of assets and stocks and homes and memories, but not of me. My brothers were there. Camden, the charming one. Graham, the clever one. Both nodding like the division of property was a business merger. My mother wore pearls and that distant expression she uses when she wants to look dignified while disappearing. They all knew I was sitting there. They just chose not to acknowledge it. I didn't expect warmth, but I expected a line, a sentence, something. Instead, they divided a life, our father's life, like I hadn't lived any part of it with them. Next to me, Ethan sat with his hands folded. No tie, no flash, just presence. He didn't say a word, he never does in rooms like that, but his eyes were locked on mine the whole time. That was enough. He'd read the draft of the estate file weeks ago. He was the one who spotted it, buried in footnotes and fallback clauses. A code, CRP 782. At first I didn't think much of it, but Ethan's voice had that quiet shift, the one he uses when he's about to say something important. This isn't just a property code, he told me. It's a custodial retention protocol, a due designation. This house. It's not legally transferable. Why? I asked. Because your father didn't just pass it down, he protected it, assigned it, through you. I remember standing in our tiny DC kitchen, the documents spread out beside the coffee machine. The same kitchen where we filed for my discharge. The same counter where Ethan once told me, "You don't need to win arguments, you just need to outlast the lie." Back in the law office, the executor reached the last page. The room was still. He looked at me, almost out of obligation, and asked, "Ms. Moore, is there anything you'd like to contest?" There it was, the moment they all feared, or hoped for. I could feel Camden stiffen, Graham clear his throat, and my mother shift in her seat like she already had the moral high ground rehearsed. I didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice, didn't quote the Uniform Code of Military Justice, though I could have recited it backwards. I simply opened the folder on my lap, the one I'd carried through 4 airports and one quiet breakdown in a hotel parking lot. Inside was the clause they missed, the signature that mattered, and the memo my father had written in his own hand, naming me as fallback custodian of a property marked, classified pending reassessment. I stood, straightened the hem of my navy blue dress, and said, "Not at this time." Because this wasn't the moment for fireworks. It was the moment before the match was struck. Ethan stood when I did, walked beside me through the hallway, held the umbrella as the rain picked up outside. Neither of us said much. We never do. But before we reached the car, he turned to me and said, "They forgot your name, but the Pentagon didn't." And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, I let myself smile, because my family had written me out, but my father, he had written me in, where it mattered most, not in their inheritance, but in his intention. And that's the only kind of legacy I ever needed. We didn't go home right away. Instead, Ethan drove us to a storage facility just outside Alexandria. Unit 32B, climate-controlled, dustless, barely bigger than a motel room. Inside, there were 6 boxes, all labeled in my father's handwriting, all untouched since the week he'd been moved into assisted care. I had the key, because he gave it to me, back when I still visited twice a month, before the family said I was interfering with their process. We opened the second box first. Inside, discharge papers, letters, a photo of my dad in uniform standing in front of a decommissioned naval observatory, and a folder, thick and stamped with faded red ink. CRP 782, custodial review pending final transfer. Ethan sat on the concrete floor, legs crossed, laptop open. He started typing codes, property IDs, defense procurement numbers. I stood in silence, reading a memo my father had drafted himself. In the event of my death and failure of proper succession, the holding known as CRP 782 shall be maintained under the authority of LT. Riley Moore, U.S. Army Ret. JAG Division. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. But I did remember the conversation 3 years prior. On the back porch of the lake house, my father in a flannel shirt and oxygen tubing. He had looked out at the water and said, "I don't trust your brothers with anything that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet. But you know what permanence feels like." Ethan looked up from the laptop. "It was never part of the civilian inheritance," he said. "It was transferred temporarily to the due in 2017. Your father filed it under custodial military oversight during tax restructuring." "Wait," I said. "You're telling me the house is federal?" "It was, but now based on this clause and this lapse. It comes back under fallback designation. To you." It was like watching dominoes fall in reverse. What they thought they'd sold, claimed, divided, had never been theirs to begin with. I contacted a retired military property lawyer I once served with. She read the clause twice and said one sentence: "If the insurance lapsed and the taxes weren't filed on time, it defaults to you. No vote, no loophole. They can't fight what's already active." That's the thing about military law. It doesn't care about feelings, only filings. 3 days later, I submitted my formal custodial claim. No press, no family notice, just a quiet email sent through secure servers. The response came in under 48 hours. Claim acknowledged. Transfer initiated. Deed reassigned to LT. More custodial recipient CRP 782. No apologies, no explanation, just confirmation. The kind that doesn't need applause. The next week, the beach house showed up in a real estate newsletter. No one had told me it was for sale. No family-wide group chat, no heads up, just a cheerful little listing: oceanfront gem, motivated seller, legacy property. I booked a stay for 3 nights under a corporate LLC. Not to be petty, not to show off, but to walk the perimeter. To run my hand across the doorframe where my initials were still scratched from a summer when I was 9. To stand in the guest room and remember how my father used to leave the light on for me, even when I didn't make it home. Ethan came with me. We brought a single bag, 1 bottle of wine, and the original documents tucked into a plain leather folio, resting between us like armor no one saw coming. When the family arrived the next afternoon, Camden, Graham, my mother, they were surprised the key code didn't work. They were more surprised when the front desk at the reception area asked, "Are you here for Miss Riley Moore's party?" Camden's jaw clicked. My mother blinked once, then stared at the clerk like she'd mispronounced a prayer. "There must be a mistake," she said. "This is the Whitmore family property." The clerk smiled politely. "It was. It's now registered under CRP 782. Miss Moore holds the deed." I watched it from across the street, didn't walk up, didn't wave. Just stood beside Ethan, arms crossed, listening to the silence fall like fog. He whispered, "You don't have to explain anything." And I didn't, because the moment had already spoken for me. The house was mine, not because I took it, but because they abandoned it. Through negligence, arrogance, and forgetting that some people document everything. That night I walked the entire house barefoot. Room by room, no music, no noise, just memory. In the back closet, I found the wind chime I'd made with my dad. Shells and strings, dog tags and knots. It had fallen, twisted, dusty. But still intact, I hung it back where it used to live, outside the kitchen window. It caught the wind just once, just enough. It started with a headline. I was making tea in the kitchen of the beach house, the one they thought they still owned, when my phone began vibrating across the counter, like it was trying to flee. Text after text, missed call, voicemail, email. Then the one that stopped me: "Did you really take the family house through a military loophole?" Attached was a screenshot from a local news broadcast. A still of me walking into the property office. Face blurred. Headline bold. "Estranged daughter uses defense clause to seize inheritance." They called me cold, calculating, a lawyer with no heart. Someone who used her father's illness to manipulate documents. There was even a quote anonymous, of course. She was always distant, always thought she was smarter than everyone. She waited for him to get weak, then took what she wanted. I didn't need a signature to know who said it. Camden had always been good at letting other people throw the stones for him. Ethan found me in the hallway, phone still in my hand. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just pulled up a chair and opened the laptop. "Let's give them what they didn't expect," he said. "Not noise, truth." We started with the emails. Years of them, receipts, group threads, messages where I was too intense, too legal, too military. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on. A folder, labeled in all caps, "For our if needed." It was dated 14 months before my father passed. Inside, a Word doc, a set of scanned letters, and one video file. In the video, my father is sitting on the back porch. It's dusk orange sky, his favorite mug in hand, a thin blanket over his knees. He looks into the camera. His voice is weaker than I remembered, but steady. "If you're watching this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. This house, it was never about the money, not about equity or legacy or impressing Savannah realtors. It was about stillness, and Riley understood that. She always did. Camden Graham, they loved the parties, the tax breaks, but Riley was the only one who sat here after the stroke, who knew the difference between a title and a trust." Then he paused. "I gave her CRP 782 because I trusted her to keep it from becoming a trophy. If they fight her, show this. If they lie, remind them I knew the law before I forgot my own name. Riley, if you're listening, you were never distant, you were just further ahead." I watched it once, then once more. Then I sent it, not to the news station, but to a military journalist I knew from a legal ethics panel 5 years ago. The kind of woman who asks for sources, not statements. Along with the video, I attached the clause, the property file, the dated medical notes, and a single message. "This is the full picture. Do what you believe is right." The article dropped 2 days later. No drama, no buzzwords, just a simple headline. "Daughter executes father's last directive, with proof the family forgot." They retracted the original story, quietly, without fanfare. The silence after was deeper than the accusations. Even my mother didn't call. The next time I saw them was in court. They had filed an emergency injunction, claimed undue influence, emotional coercion. Implied I'd confused my father into signing over a military-designated house in a state of decline. Their attorney was polished, smiled like a man born in a country club. He called me high-functioning, emotionally detached, said I had legal control but no moral compass. I didn't respond. Ethan sat behind me, still composed. When the judge asked if I had any evidence to submit, I stood, reached for the flash drive, slid it forward. One video and one supporting statement. The bailiff played it, and just like that, the courtroom changed. My father's voice filled the silence. He said my name, said what he meant, and meant it so clearly that not even legalese could drown it. My mother looked down. Camden stared straight ahead. Graham's fingers tapped the table like a metronome of regret. When it ended, the judge leaned back and said simply, "Motion denied. The documentation is valid. The video confirms clarity. This court enforces law, not family sentiment." He didn't even look at them when he said it. Outside the courthouse, a reporter tried to ask me if I had a message for my family. I paused, then answered. They spoke their version. I just responded in my father's voice. Then I walked away, with Ethan beside me, no parade. No microphone, just the knowledge that sometimes silence is louder when it carries proof. The court was done. The article stopped. The phone went quiet. Even the angry cousins who'd left scathing comments under anonymous usernames disappeared like tidewater, loud, fast, and suddenly. Gone, but the house remained. Still, unmoved. Waiting, Ethan and I returned on a Tuesday. No luggage, no press. Just a bucket of tools, a folder of deeds, and one shared decision. We weren't going to celebrate. We were going to rebuild. Not the paint, not the foundation, but the meaning. The first thing I did was remove the brass plaque on the mailbox that read the Whitmore estate. It had always felt performative, Something Camden had insisted on after his third startup, almost. I replaced it with a small wooden sign. Burned in by hand, More House, Est 1987. Reclaimed 2025. Not for brand, not for symbolism, but for accuracy. I didn't host a party. Didn't post a victory photo. But I did do one thing quietly and permanently. I opened a file with the Veterans Transitional Living Fund, donating the house as a seasonal retreat for military caregivers and their loved ones. Not for profit, not for pity, but for people like me. People who knew what it meant to be erased. Not by history, but by the people who claimed to love you the most. Ethan supported it without hesitation. He even reached out to a local college that ran community oral history projects. They sent 2 students, both veterans themselves, who helped digitize all of my father's letters. Every legal note, every photo, every voice memo, filed, preserved, archived under a new title, The Memory You Don't See in Wills. We turned the guest room into a reading lounge. Painted the walls a color called fog blue, the exact shade of my father's eyes in the morning light. Hung a map of the Georgia coastline, marked with seashell pins where my brothers and I had fished as kids. Even Camden had a pin. I didn't remove the past. I just stopped letting it define the terms of ownership. And the wind chime, it still hung outside the kitchen. Every morning, it caught the same breeze. But now, it didn't rattle like something unsettled. It sang low and steady, like it remembered, like it forgave. One afternoon, as we were sanding down the back porch railing, Ethan looked up from his work and said, "You ever regret not yelling back?" I smiled. No, because the moment you yell, they get to say you were angry. But when you just prove it, they only get silence. He nodded. Still, I hope someday they realize what they lost. They won't, I said, but that's not my work anymore. And it was, because when you win something the quiet way, you don't owe anyone noise, only stewardship, only presence, only the promise that whatever was buried, truth, memory, dignity, has been dug up and set in the light. Sometimes I still sit on the back steps at dusk, same mug, same blanket. Just me, Ethan, and the sound of waves trying to explain something the world forgot to listen to. And I think of my father's last line in that video. You were never distant, you were just further ahead. Maybe that's what healing really is, not being seen by the people who dismissed you, but choosing to be seen by the truth, and staying there, even when no one claps. If you've ever been written out of a story you helped build, you're not alone. We see you, and we remember.